Actually hear the reference to war by President Obama, but it's rarely raised by Democrats or Republicans. One of your colleagues, Joe Stiglitz, said over time the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan will cost $5 trillion.
There are a number of things that are not on the table. And frankly, I'm amazed that the president refers to what he does as a balanced approach. First of all, the war and its enormous costs off the table in any serious way. Going back to a serious taxation of corporations and of the rich in America, just for example, at the scale that they were taxed in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, off the table. Basically, what's being done is to suggest that now, after a recovery in quotations that has only recovered the stock market and corporate profits and bank reserves, that has done nothing about unemployment and foreclosure, we haven't had a balanced economic arrangement in this country for years. So suddenly we're going to be balanced in what's coming next. That's a strange kind of logic. Why is there not facing up to the war, the fact that you're not taxing the rich, and perhaps the worst, we're at a crisis because we have an economic system that hasn't worked well, and the government bailed out banks and corporations by using public money. That was done to help them. It hasn't helped many other folks. So now is not the time to do balance. Now's the time to correct the imbalance that has built up over all these years. And I think that would be where the president really ought to start.
But you do argue, contrary to some other liberal economists like Paul Krugman, that the deficits are a major problem, and that the increasing deficit spending of the U.S. government has to be brought under control. So that would seem to indicate that that your main push would be to obviously cut war spending, but also to raise taxes significantly. The
most amazing thing to me is that we talk about fixing a government budget that's in trouble, and we don't talk about the revenue side in a serious way. That is an amazing thing. If you look at what happened to the American budget over the last 20 or 30 years, the culprit is obvious. We have dropped corporate taxes. We have dropped taxes on the rich. Let me give you a couple of examples to drive it home. If you go back to the 1940s, here's what you discover. That the federal government got 50% more money year after year from corporations than it did from individuals. For every dollar that individuals paid in income tax, corporations paid $1.50. If you compare that to today, here are the numbers. For every dollar that individuals pay to the federal government, corporations pay 25 cents. That is a dramatic change that has no parallel in the rest of our tax code. Another example, in the 50s and 60s, the top bracket, the income tax rate that the richest people had to pay, for example, the 50s and 60s, it was 91%. Every dollar over $100,000 that a rich person earned, he or she had to give 91 cents to Washington and kept 9. And the rationale for that was we had come out of a Great Depression, we had come out of a Great War, we had to rebuild our society, we were in a crisis, and the rich had the capacity to pay, and they ought to pay. Republicans voted for that. Democrats voted for that. What do we have today? 91%? No. The top rate for rich people today, 35%. Again, nobody else in this society, not the middle, not the poor, have had anything like this consequence. So over the last 30, 40 years, a shift from corporate income tax to individual income tax, and among individuals from the rich to everybody else. To deal with our budget problem without discussing that, putting that front and center, making that part of the story, that's just a service to the rich and the corporations. There's no polite way to say otherwise. And there's something shameful about keeping all of that away and focusing on how we're going to take out our budget problems by cutting back benefits to old people, to people who have medical needs. There's something bizarre, and the world sees that, in a society that has done what it has done and now proposes to fix it on the backs of the majority.
And the argument